Alright, so let's get started right away with Module 1, which is all about sentence structure. And I'm going to have to admit that this is a bit of a boring topic, and maybe you think this is a little too elementary, but the reason why I wanted to start with sentence structure is because, well, number one, it frames the rest of the course very nicely. But number two, to be honest, English and Japanese are built differently. The sentences are built differently. And if you are thinking in English and trying to speak Japanese, you're going to have a very difficult time, and you might not be able to convey what you want to say. And people might not understand what you're saying, and you will inevitably lose confidence if that becomes a habit. At the same time, by knowing what you're trying to look for or listen for, it's a lot easier to pick up what people are saying when you know where the verb is supposed to be, where you know where the subject or object is supposed to be. And by building kind of that intuition, I think it really goes a long way. And I think in that sense, sentence structure is often really overlooked. So this might be a review for a lot of you, but hang in there and stick with me because I just want to make sure everybody has the same foundation before we move on to Module 2. Alright, so let me start off by posing a question to you. So what is the difference between English and Japanese sentences, besides the fact that one is in English and one is in Japanese? Well, I think we can safely say that the building blocks for both English and Japanese sentences are the same, right? The building blocks for most languages are subject, verbs, and objects. The important thing is how they're arranged. So let's take a simple sentence, I am going to Japan, and I apologize in advance if this brings back bad flashbacks of high school or middle school grammar class, but let's break this down. We've got I, which is the subject, right? Going, which is a verb, and Japan, which is the object in the sentence. So pretty simple, pretty straightforward. So what is important here is if we look at this kind of from a high level, linguists and people who study language typically refer to this as an SVO language because that's the pattern that is most natural to the language, and I guess you could say the language prefers to have the sentences built in this way. There are definitely exceptions, but most of us are very familiar with this structure, and if you think about how you speak on a day-to-day basis, this is kind of the way you build most simple sentences. Alright, so that's all fine and well, but what about Japanese? How are Japanese sentences structured? Well, we just talked about this, but the building blocks are the same, so we got that going for us. We still got verbs, subjects, and objects to worry about. But how are they arranged, right? So let's take the sentence we just looked at, I am going to Japan, and translate it into Japanese really quickly. So I am going to Japan becomes Watashi wa Nihon e ikimasu. Alright, so quickly breaking this one down, we have watashi, which is I, that's the subject, Nihon, which is Japan, that's the object, and ikimasu, to go, which is the verb. So as you can see right away, it's no longer SVO. Instead, the Japanese language prefers the SOV sentence structure. So I can already hear some of you cynics out there saying, whoop-de-doo, the object and the verb switched places. But the reason why it's important is, I don't know, if you can imagine a foreigner coming up to you and saying, I going Japan, you think, wow, this person doesn't speak the language very well. And that's not the reaction that you want to get from Japanese people when you're learning the language, because it's very disheartening. And by just drilling into your mind the SOV structure, you'll save yourself that humiliation. And it's just more conducive to engaging in conversation and communication. And knowing that you can look up in a dictionary a subject, an object, and a verb, and at least make a sentence that people will be able to understand, that's very powerful. So that's why this is important, and I encourage you to drill into your mind the SOV structure. Alright, so before I move on, I want to pass along a tip to you, and the tip is that subjects in Japanese sentences are flexible, so beware of this. It's always funny to me because a lot of the times this never gets taught in Japanese classes or textbooks, and I don't know why they choose to overlook this fact, because it's very, very important and very, very, very common in spoken everyday Japanese. So here's what I mean by this. We just covered SOV, right? Watashi wa Nihon e ikimasu. Okay, that's fine. Perfect sentence makes a lot of sense. But if you listen to Japanese people speaking real everyday conversation, real Japanese, you'll notice that they drop off the subject a lot. And so in our sample sentence, you're left with just Nihon e ikimasu. It's completely valid, and I would actually argue that this sounds more natural. I don't know anyone who would say Watashi wa Nihon e ikimasu. Everyone would just say Nihon e ikimasu, or America e ikimasu, or Hawaii e ikimasu, right? Hawaii and America. You can just interchange a place there and make a sentence. But yeah, that's definitely important. So beware of that. And just as a funny side note, you'll pay attention to Japanese people speaking English, because you'll notice they drop off the subject a lot in their sentence, and sometimes you think to yourself, are they talking about themselves or somebody else? Or you get very confused. But anyway, the other place that you'll see subjects often appear is at the end of a sentence. So this one is very common as well. And I've never seen this one being taught in a textbook, but our sample sentence would become Nihon e ikimasu watashi. And I know some people who live in Japan, and they tell me that when they learned this about Japanese and they started putting their subjects at the end of their sentences, you don't want to do it all the time, but when they started doing it, they felt like they mastered the language, because it's a very native thing to do, and it's very natural. It sounds much more natural than putting it at the front of the sentence. And, don't ask me why, but that's just the way it is. So I would actually say that learn all three of these patterns, be familiar with them, don't be afraid to use them, and don't be shocked if you hear someone Japanese using one of these three forms. All right, so we're almost at the end of this module, but before I left, I wanted to give you an opportunity to practice what we've just been talking about. So I've put down here a template sentence, if there even is such a thing. And this is a pretty basic sentence structure that you will see quite often. So what you can do here is take subjects, objects, and verbs and just fill them into the blanks that they correspond to. So, for example, if I wanted to say, I ate an apple, and I wanted to use the more masculine way of saying I, which is boku, I would say, boku wa ringo o tabemashita. All right, pretty simple, right? So maybe one thing that needs a little bit of explanation is this very far right column with the verbs. There's 2 Japanese words for every 1 English verb, and the first Japanese verb is kind of a more future tense, and the second Japanese word is a past tense of the verb. So if I wanted to say I will eat an apple, I could say boku wa ringo o tabemasu. I will eat an apple. So I think that's about it. By all means, don't limit yourself to what's on this list. That's why I have a online dictionary button there, and I initially made this as a presentation, and so it's actually a link, but obviously we decided to make this into a video, and so the link is pretty useless. So I apologize for that. But you can go to a website called jisho.org. It's my favorite online Japanese dictionary. It's very, very useful. Not only does it have Japanese to English, it also has English to Japanese, as well as kanji dictionary. So check it out, jisho.org, Jisho, if you want some more words to fill into this template sentence. So I think that about wraps it up. Hopefully you found a little bit of usefulness out of this module about sentence structure. And once you're ready, open up Module 2, where we'll talk about particles and mastering them.